Graduation day should have been the happiest moment of my life. Everyone's families filled the auditorium with cheers, except mine. My father sat in the back, arms crossed, the same man who once told me my degree was a waste of time. He didn't know about the email I'd received that morning, a $100,000 research grant with my name on it. For years I'd swallowed his doubts in silence, building my future brick by brick. Today I wasn't just walking across a stage. I was about to hand him the one thing he never gave me, undeniable proof I was worth it. The living room glowed with warm lights, the kind my mother always used for family celebrations. Gold and silver balloons floated near the ceiling, the smell of vanilla cake thick in the air. My brother, Daniel, stood in the center like a main character in a movie, grinning as Dad handed him a sleek, brand-new laptop. "To help you crush your economics program," Dad said, clapping him on the back. Everyone laughed and nodded, murmuring their approval. I smiled too because that's what you do when you're the supporting act in someone else's story. Then Dad turned to me. "And for Emily," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. "Something to keep your thoughts in order." I peeled back the paper to reveal a plain leather notebook. "For my little writings," I said, forcing a chuckle. He grinned like it was clever. The applause was polite, short. The conversation shifted back to Daniel before I could even put the notebook down. I sipped my soda, pretending I was fine with it. Later, as I carried plates to the kitchen, I heard Dad's voice drifting from the patio. "She's studying anthropology," he told a guest, tone dipped in amusement. "Honestly, it's just a waste of time. She'll never make a real living out of it." The words stung like hot water on a burn. I froze by the sink, my hands still gripping the plates. My chest felt tight, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed. "You've heard insults before," I told myself, "but never from him. Not like this." Have you ever heard the person you love most dismiss your dream in front of strangers? It's a sound that echoes long after the party's over. That night I lay in bed replaying the scene. The laugh in his voice, the certainty in his words. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but instead I stared at the ceiling, wondering if maybe he was right. The next few weeks were full of small reminders. Over breakfast, Dad bragged about Daniel's internship at a top firm, then asked me, "So, what are you doing these days?" As if my semester's worth of field work was a hobby. At family dinners, my mother would smile quickly when I spoke, then redirect the conversation toward Daniel's grades. It was never cruel. Not in the way people imagine cruelty. It was quieter than that, a constant erasing. One Sunday, I overheard them again, Dad and my uncle laughing over Daniel's future in finance. "Solid career path," Dad said. "Not like these airy subjects Emily's into." My uncle chuckled. "She'll find her way. Maybe she'll teach." Dad's silence was louder than any answer. I noticed my mother's eyes flicker toward me during these moments, as if she wanted to step in. But she never did. She'd just keep folding napkins or refilling cups. One night, when it was just the two of us, I asked her why. She set down her teacup and sighed. "Sometimes it's better not to stir things up. Your father? He believes he's protecting you." Protecting me? By telling people I was wasting my life? By making sure every achievement I had was smaller than my brother's in his eyes? I wanted to argue, but the weight in her voice made me stop. She wasn't defending him, she was surviving him. That night I opened the leather notebook for the first time. The pages smelled faintly of paper and glue. I wrote, "Maybe I really am useless, or maybe I'm just invisible here." The pen pressed harder with each word. until the tip tore the page. Days passed like this. Quiet mornings, bus rides to campus, afternoons in the library, nights hearing Daniel's name carried down the hallway. It became background noise, like the hum of an old refrigerator you don't notice until it stops. One afternoon after class, I stayed behind to help a professor pack away equipment. He asked if I'd considered presenting my recent field study at the state conference. The question startled me because it implied something my own family never did, that my work mattered. I nodded, feeling a strange heat in my chest. Hope, maybe. But that flicker dimmed the moment I walked into the kitchen that evening. Dad was there, reading the paper. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Hope you're not wasting too much time on those little projects." I wanted to tell him about the conference. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and went upstairs. In my room, I sat at my desk, notebook open. The first page already carried my earlier confession. On the second page, I wrote, "They don't see me now, but maybe they will." I closed the notebook and stared at it for a long time. Somewhere deep down, a seed had been planted. Not of rebellion exactly, but of resolve. If I was invisible here, I'd have to make myself visible somewhere else. Downstairs, the sound of laughter rose again. I pressed my palms to my ears. I didn't want to hear it this time. I wanted to hear my own voice, even if it was only in my head. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about my degree, or my father's words, or even Daniel's laptop. It was about whether I was willing to let someone else write my story for me. The answer, I realized, was no. The campus library smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the kind of scent that made me feel both small and infinite. I'd taken a part-time position as a research assistant in the anthropology department, sorting data, transcribing interviews, running small analyses for projects I admired. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My father didn't know. I hadn't told him about the job or about the small academic group I joined after class, where students huddled over laptops and whiteboards like detectives chasing the truth. Every meeting felt like stepping into another world. There were no questions about real jobs or lectures about wasted time. Just people who cared about the same obscure details I did. Patterns in migration maps, the oral histories of communities no one else thought about. I found myself volunteering for tasks, staying late, carrying home folders thick with notes. One rainy Tuesday, I was hunched over my desk at home, drafting a proposal for a grant I'd read about weeks earlier. It was ambitious. Too ambitious, maybe. The prize was a $100,000 grant for innovative research projects. I'd never applied for something that big before, but as my fingers typed out the last paragraph, I felt a quiet defiance settle in my chest. I hit send. 2 weeks later, between classes, I checked my email on my phone. The subject line made my breath catch. Preliminary round results. Congratulations! My hands trembled as I opened it. You have been selected as one of the top 20 candidates for the 100K grant. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. If it were you, would you tell your family, right now? Or wait until you could place the trophy on the table in front of them? I decided to wait. The thought of their skepticism swallowing my joy before it could take root made me sick. So I carried the secret like a glowing ember, tucked close to my chest. Weeks passed in a blur of late nights, coffee cups, and pages filled with notes. I prepared for the next selection round, polishing my presentation until the words felt like muscle memory. Then came the meeting that cracked something inside me. Our group gathered in a small seminar room, the air heavy with the smell of dry erase markers. I began presenting my updated proposal, voice steady at first. Midway through, Professor Harlan interrupted. "Your scope is too broad," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're trying to solve too many problems at once. Focus, or you'll end up saying nothing at all." The room went quiet. I nodded, cheeks burning, scribbling his notes in the margin though my hand shook. It wasn't the first time I'd been criticized, but this felt different. Sharper, heavier. For the first time, I wondered if my father's words had been prophecy, not prejudice. That night, I spread my papers on the kitchen table, determined to rework the structure. I didn't hear him come in until his shadow fell over the page. Dad picked up one of my drafts, scanning it. "This is what you've been working on?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yes." He set it down and gave a short laugh, low, dismissive. "No one's going to fund this. It's too idealistic." He left before I could respond, the sound of his footsteps fading into the living room, where Daniel's laughter filled the air. I gathered my papers, hands tight around them, and went upstairs. In my room, I closed the door and slid down to the floor, my back against the bed. The voices from downstairs carried up through the air vents. Easy laughter, the clink of glasses. I curled my knees to my chest, pressing my forehead against them. I could feel the warmth of that secret ember inside me, but it flickered in the draft of his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe no one would fund it. Maybe I was fooling myself, wasting months chasing something that would never matter to anyone but me. I lay there, listening to the rise and fall of their voices. In that moment, I wasn't the daughter, the sister, the student. I was an outsider in my own home, pressed against the walls of a life I was trying to change. And yet, even as the doubt pooled in my chest, I couldn't bring myself to blow out that ember completely. Not yet. The email's subject line read, "Mentorship Opportunity. Grant Finalists." I almost didn't open it, certain it was just another generic notification. But as I skimmed the message, my pulse quickened. Each finalist would be paired with a mentor, someone who had navigated the challenges of launching a research project from scratch. My assigned mentor was Dr. Michael Turner, an anthropologist whose work on displaced communities had been cited in nearly every textbook I'd studied. We met in a quiet campus cafe the following week. He arrived in a worn blazer, hair peppered with gray, eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that made you feel seen. "Emily," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "I've read your proposal. There's something there. We just need to make it bulletproof." Over steaming mugs of coffee, we went through my draft line by line. Instead of brushing off my ideas, he challenged them in ways that sharpened them. Where Professor Harlan had left me deflated, Dr. Turner left me energized. Halfway through, he paused, studying me over the rim of his cup. "You're from the Westbridge neighborhood, aren't you?" I nodded, surprised. "Does your father happen to be Robert Carson?" The name hit me like a sudden gust of wind. "Yes." "You know him?" Dr. Turner leaned back, a shadow of something unreadable crossing his face. "We went to graduate school together. Worked on a joint project, actually. He was one of the brightest minds I knew." He hesitated, then added, "But he walked away from academia before finishing. Said it wasn't worth the instability." A thought curled cold in my stomach. Maybe he hadn't been dismissing my degree because it was mine. Maybe he was still wrestling with his own unfinished story. As I left the cafe, Dr. Turner's words replayed in my mind. He walked away. Could that be why every conversation about my career ended in a wall? The realization felt like a door cracking open on a room I hadn't known existed, and yet another thought crept in as I walked across campus. If he quit, does that mean he's been trying to protect me, or keep me from doing what he couldn't? Maybe, I thought, Dr. Turner isn't just my mentor. Maybe he's the reason my father doesn't believe in me at all. The weeks leading up to the International Symposium were a blur of preparation. Dr. Turner pushed me to refine my narrative, cut the fluff, and anchor my findings in clear, urgent language. He made me practice answering the hardest questions I could imagine, and some I couldn't. The morning of the symposium, I stood backstage clutching my note cards, the low hum of voices spilling through the curtains. This was the first time I would present my work to an audience that wasn't my peers or professors, but to scholars, journalists, and donors from around the world. When they called my name, the lights were blinding. My first words came out too fast, but by the second slide, my voice steadied. I spoke about the communities I'd studied, the oral histories they carried, and the urgent need to preserve them before they disappeared. I saw nods in the crowd, people scribbling notes. The Q&A was intense, probing, but engaged. When it ended, applause rolled toward me like a wave. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor nearby. I walked to a park across from the conference hall, sat on a bench, and let the noise fade. My hands still trembled, but not from fear. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my worth by what my father might say. I didn't need him to approve. I didn't need him to understand. Sitting there, surrounded by the rustle of leaves, I realized I was enough. Not because I'd proven him wrong, but because I'd proven myself right. The auditorium shimmered under the stage lights, a sea of caps and gowns swaying gently as graduates found their seats. I scanned the crowd from my place in line, searching for my family. My mother waved when she saw me, her smile tentative but proud. Next to her sat Daniel, tapping something on his phone. And there, one chair apart, was my father, arms crossed, expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the stage as if I were invisible. When my name was called, I walked across the platform, diploma in hand, feeling the heat of 1,000 eyes. But my father's gaze remained cold, detached, like this was any other errand he'd been obligated to attend. The dean handed me the microphone. My speech was supposed to be 2 minutes, a polite thank you to faculty and peers. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Before I step off this stage, I want to share something with you." A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. I began with the research, the nights spent hunched over data, the communities whose voices I wanted to amplify. Then I dropped the first reveal. This morning, I received official confirmation that my proposal has been awarded the $100,000 Horizon Grant. The applause erupted, echoing off the high ceilings. But I wasn't finished. I'm also honored to announce that our project will be supported by an additional partnership with the International Cultural Preservation Fund. I let the words hang in the air. This was no small name. It was the kind of organization my father had once dreamed of working with, before he'd left the field entirely. Somewhere in the crowd, I knew he was hearing not just my success, but the echo of his own abandoned ambition. The camera operator panned to my family. My mother clapped, eyes glistening. Daniel grinned, half surprised. And then, the lens caught my father. For the first time in years, his expression cracked, just slightly. Shock first, then something else. Was it pride? Or just the ghost of it? I ended with a thank you to my mentors, to my peers, and to the people who taught me that doubt can be fuel if you choose to burn it. The applause rose again, but all I could feel was the thudding in my chest. As the ceremony ended, graduates spilled into the hallway, hugging, posing for photos. My family moved toward me, but my father broke away, walking briskly toward the exit. I followed him outside into the bright afternoon. Dad, I called. He stopped but didn't turn. Congratulations, he said, his voice flat. That's it? I asked. You just heard I've secured funding for years of work. Work you said no one would ever support. And that's all you have to say? His shoulders tensed. I'm glad it's working out for you. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was distance, a wall. I took a step closer. Why have you fought me on this every step of the way? He finally turned, his eyes shadowed. Because I know what this life takes from you. I wasn't going to stand by and watch you make the same mistakes I did. Before I could respond, a group of graduates swept between us, their laughter loud. And when the space cleared, he was already walking toward the parking lot. I let him go. Back inside, the reception hall buzzed with celebration. I tried to join my classmates, but the air felt heavy. When I finally stepped outside for fresh air, I noticed something on the ground near the doorway. A folded piece of newsprint, yellowed with age. I picked it up. It was a newspaper clipping, the edges frayed. The headline read, Local Researcher Wins Grant for Cultural Preservation Project. The photo below showed a much younger version of my father, standing beside a group of community leaders. The smile on his face was open, unguarded. The article spoke of his project's potential impact, his passion for preserving oral histories. But there was no follow-up story, no record of completion. I held the paper for a long moment, feeling the wind tug at its corners. He must have kept this in his pocket today. Maybe to remind himself of what could have been. Maybe to prepare for what he feared I would face. The sun was dipping lower, shadows stretching across the lawn. Students were still taking photos in front of the fountain, tossing caps in the air. I stood apart, the clipping in my hand, my gown swaying lightly in the breeze. The feeling inside me was tangled, part triumph, part ache. I'd wanted him to see me, to say the words I'd been chasing for years. But holding that paper, I understood something I hadn't before. His resistance hadn't come from thinking I was incapable. It had come from knowing exactly how capable I was, and fearing the cost. The wind caught the edge of the clipping again, and I tightened my grip. Maybe one day I'd show it to him, or maybe I'd keep it as my own reminder. That our stories aren't just about what we achieve, but about what we choose to finish. The lawn smelled faintly of cut grass, the air cooler now. I let myself breathe in the quiet. My father had walked away, but not without leaving something behind. It wasn't the recognition I'd hoped for, but it was a thread, however thin, that still connected us. The email arrived 3 days after graduation. I saw his name in the sender field and almost didn't click it, certain it would be some clipped, polite remark that didn't warrant a reply. But when I opened it, there were just 12 words. If you have time, I'd like to talk about your project. No punctuation except the period at the end. No love, Dad, no warmth. And yet, it was more than he'd offered me in years. If it were you, would you forgive right away? Or would you make him work for every inch of understanding? I stared at the screen, my hands still over the keyboard, the yellowed clipping from graduation lying on my desk. I typed back a short reply. Let's meet this weekend, somewhere public. It felt safer that way. We chose a small cafe downtown. The kind of place with wide windows and wood tables that looked older than the building itself. I got there early, ordered tea, and picked a table near the back. The door chimed and there he was. Same pressed shirt, same guarded face. But a hesitancy in his step I hadn't seen before. Emily, he said, taking the seat across from me. He glanced at the tea between us as if not sure whether to comment. I expected him to dive into the project, to ask about budgets or deadlines. But instead he said, "How's Daniel?" It threw me. "He's fine. Busy, I guess." We talked about my mother's garden, about the road construction near our old neighborhood, about the cafe's strange habit of serving water in mason jars. Not a single mention of my research. It was as if we were learning to speak to each other in a language that didn't include judgment or defense. The silence between topics wasn't sharp this time. It was open. When he finally leaned back and looked at me, there was something unreadable in his expression. "I kept up with the symposium online," he said. "Didn't know they streamed it." I blinked. "You watched?" He nodded. "You were good, confident." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. We let the conversation drift back to lighter topics, but I carried those 2 words, "you were," like small stones in my pocket, warm from being held. That afternoon became the first of several meetings. We didn't talk about everything, and we certainly didn't fix everything. But something was shifting. The walls were still there, but there were windows now, and sometimes the light came through. Weeks later he called me, his voice more formal than usual. "There's someone I'd like you to meet, an old colleague. He has deep pockets and a history of funding cultural preservation projects. I think your proposal could resonate with him." I paused. "You want to introduce me?" "Yes, if you're interested." It was a strange sensation, like standing on a bridge you weren't sure would hold. Part of me wanted to believe this was support, plain and simple. Another part heard the old voice. This is how control starts. I agreed to meet, but I kept my guard up. The introduction happened over dinner at a quiet restaurant. The man, Mr. Abrams, was sharp-eyed and inquisitive, asking the right questions without condescension. My father mostly listened, occasionally adding a detail about the project's scope. After dessert, Mr. Abrams said, "I'd like to be involved. This has potential to scale internationally." I smiled, thanked him, but didn't commit on the spot. I needed time. In the car afterward, my father said, "You don't have to decide now, but this could change everything." "I know," I said. Then, before I could stop myself, "Why now?" He gripped the wheel tighter. "Because I was wrong." It was the closest thing to a confession I'd heard from him. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment," he went on. "But I was just protecting myself from watching you take a path I couldn't finish." I looked out the window, the city lights blurring. The part of me that had waited years for these words wanted to open the door to forgiveness right then. The other part wanted him to keep proving it. That night I sat at my desk with 2 things in front of me: Mr. Abrams's business card and the newspaper clipping I'd found at graduation. If I took this connection, would it be because I needed the help, or because I wanted to let him rewrite part of my story? Could I accept his hand without giving him the pen? The answer wasn't clear, but I knew this: whatever I chose, it would be my choice. The next morning, I emailed Mr. Abrams to set up a follow-up meeting, without copying my father. I didn't know if that was trust or caution. Maybe both. The decision came quietly, not with a dramatic epiphany, but with a steady, measured certainty. I would accept my father's connection to Mr. Abrams, but on my terms. The funding would come with a clear agreement. I would retain full creative and operational control of the project. No interference, no quiet edits, no shifting the mission to fit someone else's vision. When I told my father, he paused as if weighing the conditions, then nodded. "Fair," he said simply. The following months were a whirlwind. With Abrams's funding supplementing the grant, I was able to expand the scope. hiring additional researchers, traveling to remote communities, digitizing archives that had been gathering dust for decades. My father came to some of the progress meetings, mostly listening, occasionally offering logistical suggestions, but never crossing the lines I'd drawn. It was during the final phase, when we unveiled the interactive digital archive, that I invited my family to the project's official launch. The event was held in a renovated community center, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto displays of photographs, maps, and recorded interviews. I stood at the entrance greeting guests when I saw them walk in. My mother in a soft blue dress, Daniel with a camera slung around his neck, and my father, looking around the room with an expression I couldn't read. We toured the exhibit together. He stopped at a large projection of one of the oral histories, the voice of an elder, recounting the struggles of preserving language in a changing world. He listened all the way through, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the screen. When the formal presentation ended, we gathered near the main display for a photograph. My mother stood on one side of me, my father on the other. As the photographer counted down, I glanced at him. His gaze met mine, steady, and this time there was no shadow of doubt. The click of the shutter caught it, that unspoken acknowledgement, warmer and heavier than any applause I'd ever received. The picture would later hang in my office, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder that some distances can be crossed, slowly, carefully, but crossed all the same. Weeks after the launch, I invited my father to my apartment. He sat at the kitchen table looking mildly out of place among the stacks of research materials and half-packed travel bags. I set a wrapped package in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Just open it." He peeled back the paper to reveal a hardbound book. On the cover, in simple lettering, "Field Notes from a Daughter." "It's my journal," I said. "From the beginning. Everything I wrote. About the work, about the doubts, about you." He ran his hand over the cover but didn't open it. "Why give this to me?" "Because you should know I never wanted to beat you," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to walk with me." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally, he opened the book to the first page. In my handwriting, the words, "I never wanted to win against you. I just wanted you beside me." He closed the book gently, his fingers lingering on the edge. "Thank you," he said, voice low. That night after he left, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. The project was thriving, but what stayed with me wasn't the funding or the accolades. It was that single moment of clarity between us. Our story wasn't neat. It wasn't the kind of reconciliation that erases the past. But it was honest, and that was enough. If you're listening to this, maybe you're thinking about someone in your life, the person whose approval you've chased or whose doubt you've carried. Maybe the ending you imagine isn't the one you'll get, but maybe, like me, you'll find that the real victory isn't proving them wrong. It's finding a way to walk forward, together or apart, with your own voice intact.